Welcome everybody. I'm here to talk to you today about creating great products by learning about people remotely. And we're in a pretty fortunate position, even though it may not feel that way at the moment, given our current conditions, because we have a fairly mature and established way of researching and collecting data remotely these days, especially with the way the user experience and product development community and technology community have been functioning, especially for the last 10 years. So there's a whole lot of opportunity there for people who don't know much about remote data collection, research and testing to enjoy and learn from this talk. And also I'm going to give you some information to do with just high-level principles of how to research well and how to speak with people in an authentic way to get the best information and value out of those conversations. So welcome everyone, and thank you for being here, and thank you again to Ed and Lisa for inviting me to be part of this. So firstly, I'll just give you a bit of information about myself. I've been working in, I suppose, technology for almost 20 years. I started out as a designer in print and web and digital, and I was also a front-end engineer. And in the last 10 years, I've been working in user experience research and human-centered research and design. And I'm really passionate about what research can do for product delivery and innovation. And I think that most of you, if you're here, will be interested in that too. So that's a picture of my cat sitting on my notes up there. Bosco was helping me get this talk ready. So yeah, I am a little bit biased towards Agile and Lean, but I won't be talking about Agile and Lean much today. I'll just be talking about ways of working and ways of understanding other people and adopting a learning mindset. So on to some hygiene around what we're doing in this session. So you probably will have noticed that your microphones and video are switched off at the moment, but you will have the opportunity to actually ask questions at the end. So if you do have any questions in the meantime, please do ask them in the Q&A channel. There is a Q&A button at the top of your screen, and there is an ability to vote up questions that you think are really interesting. So by all means, do vote them up if you think there's a question you really want to have answered. Likewise, if there's any comments that you want to make, I'm going to be asking you questions throughout this talk, and I'd really love it if you could answer, not so much for a data collection purpose, but for us to understand the people that we're speaking with today and the audience group that we have. So if there's any specific topics or things you want us to amp up on, we'll try and get there, but we just do have an hour, so we'll do our best. And if we can't get there today, we might get there another day. So thank you. So when we think about people and delivering products, what do we mean? On Twitter the other day, I saw this really awesome post by Indy Young, and she's been talking about that a lot, that users and customers are more than just that, they're people. And so are our stakeholders, our prospective customers, our target markets. Hi everyone, thank you for joining. Our partners, the organisation that we serve, the supply chains that we interact with, third-party systems and software houses, and our family and our kids are also collaborators with us in the journey to product delivery, especially in our current times when we're working from home. So can you tell me in the comments window how many of you are working from home or how many aren't? Because I might be making a huge assumption that you're working from home. I know there's lots of people who are, especially in our community in product delivery, especially people who work in corporate settings. Yes, I can see a lot of people are. So this is our new reality. And like I said before, we're so lucky that we have the technologies and services available to us to enable us to talk with people like we are today, to learn from them and also to research and test and deliver still. So stay tuned, we'll talk about that soon. So people and products and remote working, what is that and how do we knit those together? Well, right now we're in a distributed context and we're almost 100% distributed on this call. So all of you are in different places, and I guess what we have now is we've gone from certain conditions, say 3 or 4 weeks ago, and a certain status quo to a new status quo and outcomes. In product delivery and in systems and service design and all of the related fields and technology, we analyse conditions and we look to achieve outcomes. And I guess what we're doing right now is coming to terms with new conditions. And these are our distributed conditions. And it may be, as I said before, even though I can see that many of you are working from home and are at home right now, it may be a huge assumption to think that all of our customers and users and partners and supply chains that we rely on are actually at home. They may still be physically distanced though, and in a form distributed, because people are being constrained by government guidelines right now around how close they can be together. So there is a sense of distribution on the street or in different places like hospitals. But yeah, we're fairly unique, I suppose. So it's really good to assume that we're not all in the same situation. So thinking about that and the fact that we're all in different situations, how do we go from this current status quo to the next status quo and a newer one? And how do we engage with our current conditions to still innovate and improve our product delivery? So for some of us, this might feel normal. I know for me, I've been working remotely off and on and in distributed teams for almost a decade. And before that, I worked with distributed teams even though I was co-located. So I think it's really interesting to see how everyone's handling this. And there have been reports of overwork or panic working at the moment. And I'd say that we're all scrambling just to understand and settle down and actually still achieve the new status quos that we had before COVID happened and before we were all required to be distributed. So this looks a little bit like design thinking. You can see here the scribble and the chaos before you create themes and understand outcomes and insights to create actions. So the new conditions, as I said before, is that we are distributed, and some of us are used to it and some of us aren't, and our customers and our users may be used to it or not. And it may be more difficult or less difficult to reach those people due to new conditions and constraints. So here are some really great resources for you to check out. There's a book on remote research. I've actually got it at home here. If you can see it, it's by Nate Bolt and Tony Tuolumene. I think that's how you say it. Great book on remote research. Another book by the 37 Signals folks, Jason Fried and Co, Remote, and also Work Together Anywhere. And the Tabor folks, Ed and Lisa, had the author of this book, one of the authors, Lisette, come and talk at First Conference last year, and I was lucky enough to meet her. Really great references to understand how to interact with teams and collaborate and work remotely or at distance from other people, but still collaborate effectively. So remote data collection can relate to any form of data collection that includes information from people or things or behaviours or monitoring. However, in relation to people, it's been a mode of research that we've had, as I said, for a long time. And there's already a lot of value attached to remote research and remote data collection. So we've got the value of potentially making it more convenient because of geographical reach, and it might be more cost effective to do remote research with global users and customers and people that we need to connect with, global meetings, global workshops, for example, in the current conditions, using collaboration software and video software and other forms of communication. We also have the value of remote data collection is that we can potentially get larger volumes of information depending on the method of data collection we use. So it could be running experiments with statistically significant results. It could be running surveys with statistically significant participation. It could just be it's more convenient and rapid for us to reach people through virtual platforms, and also it can be more cost effective. We also have a new situation, which is a necessity of actually being distributed now. So isn't it great that we have these tools and services on offer? And I'll talk more about those later. At the moment, I'm just going to focus on how we actually learn. So thinking just about the terms that we're using, we're talking about people and we're talking about things or products. So people are usually a group of humans made up to fulfill a common purpose. It's usually a collective term. A person is a singular term. And that could relate to users, community, loads of different groups of people. And products are things, but they usually result from conditions. So people can also be products of conditions, and I'll explain that a bit more. So when we think about this and the relationship between conditions, products, including people, behaviours and things, and outcomes, it's a very cyclical thing. So the outcome of whatever happens before actually affects the conditions. So when we think about the extrinsic behaviours of people, we behave and act and say and do things. We also make stuff, we build stuff. Product delivery is building things or services, and conditions can create outcomes. So that's intrinsic and extrinsic. It can influence thinking, behaviour, what we do next, how we follow instructions, how we follow through on things. It's quite interesting. And when we think about the way we do things, we also have the ability to do it a certain way, and that affects our behaviours. So we may receive instructions and then we act on those instructions, or we choose not to, or we understand conditions and then try to cite that around problem solving and experimentation. So you can see that there's different ways of reacting to conditions, and really we can choose how we do that. So we work in ecosystems, and you know, a single product is one of many products and services or systems available to people in the world. And there are many different kinds of systems out there. So you can see here, it's a complex group of things and people that react and interact with each other. And you're part of that. You could also be a user of another product, system or service, and you could be over in the rest of world bucket on the right-hand side. But for the purpose of this, I'm putting you in the organisation and team bucket, assuming you're a producer and you're involved in product delivery. So let me know if you are or if you're not. I'd love to know if there's anyone here who isn't involved in product delivery, and please let us know. So you can see here as well the effects or the conditions of the organisation, for example, and the influencing factors on the organisation can actually affect the people, and they can become products of the organisation. So I'm going to talk about Conway's Law in a second, and if you haven't heard of it, I'll explain it. But this is an expression of Conway's Law where all of a sudden the organisation affects and creates a product of the people, and the people become synonymous with the product and the effects on people outside of the organisational ecosystem. It's quite interesting. So the value of understanding this is the fact that we need to be self-aware enough not to become products of conditions, and to put our learning hats on and evaluate those conditions to problem solve effectively. So what we really want to get to is a learning loop or a feedback loop with all of these different groups of people to understand that we're effectively problem solving in order to find solutions. So when we're doing this remotely, that's just a different mode. We could be doing this in a co-located fashion remotely. It doesn't really matter. At a high level, we're problem solving, we're learning, and we're testing, and we're getting feedback, and we're adjusting as we go, and hopefully improving what we're delivering. So understanding from the group, and I know that there's a lot of people greeting here, which is really lovely, and I don't want to stop you from doing that. But if anyone wants to tell us how you currently learn about people as part of delivering products, we'd really love to hear about that, because other people in this audience might be able to hear about that too. So as I said before, I really feel that there's an opportunity cost involved in not learning from people, or, you know, understanding users or customers, or speaking and collaborating with our colleagues or organisational groups and partners? Absolutely there is, because what we don't learn, we don't know. And when we don't understand that we have choices, we experience scarcity, and we do have an opportunity cost. And that could be potentially a cost on revenue, it could be a cost on growth, it could be a cost on innovation, it could be a cost on improvement. The list goes on. So Conway's law relates to the theory that Melvin Conway had, that organisations design systems that mirror their own communication structures. So if we're not talking to each other and collaborating, and we're not talking to the people that we're delivering products and services to, how are we actually meant to create value for them and create value for our organisations? And I'd say that's not very easily. So interesting things to think about when you think about talking to people, and why we need to maintain and increase that, especially during this time. So a great book to read about learning and unlearning is Barry O'Reilly. Resetting the Way You Think is a great way to start. And again, thinking about improvement cycles and thinking about radical change. Here is an illustration of Kaizen and Kaikaku, and they're both terms from lean manufacturing. The Toyota Corporation used those terms, and many people in software engineering would be familiar with Kaizen and CI. Without understanding and learning, we reduce our opportunities and we have an opportunity cost. And then getting to that status quo may not be as radical as we'd like it to be. So, you know, in these times, we do have an opportunity to be disrupted by other companies. There's a risk there, and we have an opportunity to disrupt the markets ourselves. So thinking about that and thinking about the learning opportunities, even more of an opportunity to improve your ways of having authentic conversations with people and talking about things in a way that's really meaningful and focused. So worldviews are things that we talk about in design and in relation to how we see the world and how people from a psychological perspective see the world. And everyone has a worldview, and that might be inherited through culture, ethnicity, demographics, your family, a whole lot of different kinds of effects. It could be through education and learning and changing your mind. It might be fixed or alterable. But ultimately, we all have a certain worldview at a certain time. And you could say my worldview is biased towards learning. So that's my worldview. But what we have here is that sometimes your worldview can be challenged, especially when you start collecting data and seeing other people's points of view. And sometimes that data might be through running experiments, and it might be statistical or quantitative, or it might be qualitative, and it might be situational, experiential, or contextual. So really important to take hold of the opportunity of learning about other people's experiences, understanding they may be different to yours, and not being threatened by that, but actually open to that difference. So mental models are similar to worldviews. We use mental models often as a phrase in usability testing and computer science. Really what we do when we usability test and prototype test is to test and evaluate against other people's mental models. And, you know, it's really interesting because designers and users sometimes can be similar in the way they see things, but they might be very different. So super important to continue to test and learn in different ways as you deliver products and services while we're in this time. And the fact that we can do it is really wonderful because we have so many tooling and opportunities there. So I'll talk about those opportunities later. So like I said, just like with worldviews, it could be really confronting to find out that other people have a different perspective or see things slightly differently to how you intended them to be. Here is, I had to drop this in, it's the guy who talks about double rainbow. Has anyone seen that? It's just so awesome. It makes me happy all the time. So if anyone feels like a laugh or a giggle, and a very gentle one, because it's certainly not to do with laughing at this guy. It's what this video is about on YouTube is this guy who is in Yosemite National Park in California, and he wakes up and sees this amazing double rainbow. And he's just moved to tears. He's just so overwhelmed by the beauty of this scene. But if you put a scientist there, they might say, oh, it's a slight refraction. So interesting how different people can see things in different ways and maybe less or more impressed or less or more satisfied by what we actually do for them. So do look at double rainbow. It's really gorgeous. So another question for you, if you have time, double rainbow, yeah, is, how do you have authentic conversations with people? So if we were in a natural surrounding and we weren't on screen and talking to each other like we are now, what would that be like, and how would you interact, and what can you do and can't you do online? I mean, I know personally from having lots and lots and lots of Zoom conversations and workshops and interactions in the last few weeks, sometimes maintaining eye contact on screen is really hard. And I actually said to a friend or a person I was speaking to the other day, what we should do is just look away, because actually I know that you're here with me, but I don't expect you to stare at the screen like we're looking at each other. It's okay. And we ended up just having a great conversation. We were much more relaxed and we weren't trying to engage as we would in real life. However, there is a need for warmth and a need for listening and a need for engagement and focus in these get-togethers that we have, whether they're with, in research contexts or testing or workshops or collaboration sessions with our teams. We need to show that we're actually engaged and we're open and we're authentically listening to people. So that's a challenge. And I've been, as I said before, I've been undertaking remote forms of research and testing for quite a long time. And I can say I still find that is a challenge, but there are ways to get around it and enable people to feel valued in those exchanges. So one of those ways, I think, is really to be humble in your exchange with other people, because when you adopt a learning mindset, you actually are adjusting the way you think about the world. And that's turning on your curiosity, turning on your active listening, being self-aware and asking as good questions as you can in terms of being open and being present as much as possible. And we know that can be challenging right now with families at home. My daughter's home with me. I've got a cat, a partner. We, as adults, actually understand how to interact around work. But my daughter, she's just old enough to actually be interested in her own video calls. So I feel quite lucky. It would have been hard if she was 3 and this was happening now. So hats off to any of the parents there who are doing these kind of activities while they've got kids at home. You're doing really well. So that's where we support each other. So thinking about worldviews and actually thinking about how we think about the world in terms of our mindset and attitudes, we have the opportunity to be growth-oriented and learning-oriented, or being fixed. And there's a bunch of triggers that trigger responses either on fixed or growth. And you can look this up. It's actually in Mindset, Carol Dweck's book. There's also a bunch of information online. You don't need to buy the book. But things that trigger our mindset approaches might be challenges, obstacles, efforts, criticisms, or success of others. So we have opportunities to be open, generous, happy for other people, learning from our failures, testing and learning in life as well as in work. And if we switch on that side of our brain and become self-aware, that can really help us in many ways. So thinking about how you adjust your mindset, if you've been to other talks this week, there have been talks about mindfulness and being there for your teams. I haven't been to them all. I'm really sorry, Ed and Lisa, but I would have loved to have been, because I think there was some really great content around these themes of self-awareness and being part of a group. So without sort of, going on about it too much, I can't emphasise more that you should really learn about this and take this time as an opportunity to switch on your learning. Because these attitudes really guide our behaviours and decisions and our ability to really bring value, both to ourselves, our families, our organisations and people that we're serving out there in delivery. So do think about it. Okay, so active listening, what is that? And it sounds really funny to say that when I'm just talking to you the whole time. However, for any of you who haven't heard of Simon Sinek, great person to look at YouTube on. He's also written a book. He talks about great leaders eating last and being the last person to talk in the room. Sometimes it's super hard, especially if you're a passionate communicator, not to talk. And it may feel, especially with certain examples of leadership that we've had recently in the last decades or so, that being the one to talk all the time exudes authority. However, listening is really important, and it's actually leadership 2.0. So do think about that. Have a think about how you can listen, be present, be a great leader through listening and service. Think about asking why. Thinking about how you can actually empower people through listening to them and hearing their stories. And if you do qualitative research, there's a really big part of that that's all about listening and being observant and really acknowledging the information that you're receiving. There's also a good resource, Make Meaningful Work. Some friends of mine, Dan and Joe, over in Hong Kong, have developed these beautiful frameworks with UX Matters. So do check that out as well. Okay, so self-awareness. This is a big thing for everyone. It's really semi-easy for me to feel self-aware while I'm watching myself on screen while I'm talking to you. However, we don't always have that presence of mind. We don't always have a camera on ourselves, and sometimes we have to think and be present in ourselves when we're in a situation. So we know that in order to improve, we need to understand ourselves, take feedback, constructive and rational feedback is important. So when we think about candor between people, it's really important to impose respect into that communication. And again, listening, being present, mindfulness is really important. And we all have different personalities, and Brené Brown, the patron saint of empathy and vulnerability, even admits her own triggers and faults, and that's part of her vulnerability to the public. She's a well-renowned researcher in vulnerability. So do look at her, because to be self-aware is to be vulnerable and to understand yourself and to grow, and that can be hard. So if you want to be a great person, in terms of being a great colleague, a great person in your profession, it does not hurt to be able to be self-aware. Asking questions. Asking why is a big deal, and root cause analysis can really help us solve for conditions. That's what our scientists are doing right now with COVID. They're asking why, and they're looking into stuff, and they're being scientific. We can do that in different ways, in different settings, in order to really unpack what people need and what we need to do to resolve constraints and conditions to create great outcomes and improvement. So there's a whole lot of suggestions here. There's some great books, Practical Empathy, and also Simon Sinek's Start With Why. He's got a golden circle model you can use, and this really helps in user research and also asking questions in surveys, anything that's qualitatively constructed. Think about openness and asking questions in an open way, not in a driven way that takes people into a corner where they can't get out, and you're being very deterministic with your questioning. You need to be very open. So being present, again, deep breaths, limiting distractions, actively listening, try to focus on the people you're with. Some great activities that I've done have been improv. I've been to a few activities up at the Google offices in Sydney where they've had improv instructors, and improv is an awesome, fun activity to do with people to keep them in the moment. It's a bit of theatre sports, and really you can't think outside of what you're doing because it's all spontaneous interaction. So if you practice that, it helps ground people into thinking about now. And if you need a good warm-up for a workshop where you think that people might be distracted, try a short improv activity at the beginning. So next question is for you. How do you organise around your customer research or data collection? How do you do it? So it'd be really cool if you could tell us how you do it. I've got lots of different ways I've done it before. I guess for me, and what I'm going to talk to you about now is really around learning objectives. So learning objectives for me guides the whole structure of research or data collection or testing. I always take it back to what are the objectives? And when I lift it up to learning objectives, it could be testing, it could be research, qualitative, quantitative, it could be anything, right? But you've got to set your objectives first and ask your questions. So as we know, people really value insights. And if we show and demonstrate that we understand the people that we're delivering to, my goodness, you're going to impress the people up top. If you're a CEO, you may really be impressed by your staff because they get it. They actually understand what people need and what they're actually expecting of your product, system or service out there in the ether and where the opportunities might be. So great opportunities there to think about. And we know through, the data science field that tacit data is often the most valuable, but it's the least quantifiable data or the least easy to access, because that is actually tacit and experiential and context specific and often in people's heads or around people's situations. So that is why qualitative research is so important, and that's why we must continue that if we can. Explicit knowledge and data is much more structured and objective and sits in the space of experimentation, test and learn, pure test and learn, and structured interviews, things that are very, very narrowly constrained, often requires or accesses explicit data. So it could be task completion, or it could be success or fails in usability testing, or it could be ratings. There could be a whole lot of different data that you collect that's explicit. So I guess I'm going to make a jump. I don't want to be absolute or extreme, but you could say tacit data sits in the space of social science and explicit data sits in the space of scientific method. However, there's different, things that you could apply. You may disagree with me, that's my initial thought. However, I do think that these spaces are really interesting, and there's cases for each of those when you design your learning objectives to collect data. So here's an example with the Kaizen curve where you've got new conditions. Maybe you don't have any data at all, except for some benchmark industry data. You might have a little bit of qualitative information, and you decide to do a larger qualitative generative piece of research. And then you have something to establish a status quo, and then you start building and you're improving and you're using tests and structured interviews to give you an outcome that's a new outcome. And you could also be using that outcome to generate new conditions. So there's a whole lot of different ways you can structure research. The learning funnel is something that I think about when I think about getting from conditions to outcomes, and you can apply different methods to that, maybe design thinking, maybe different kinds of data collection exercises. It's up to you. But really do ask your team what the questions are that you need to solve for. And I won't read all of these out to you, they're in the deck. These are some suggestions that you could use when you're talking about what you need to understand. So based on the people you're seeking to understand and the context and the potential methods that you use to understand it, you'd be asking these questions first and defining the problem. So moderated or unmoderated research can be done online or testing or data collection. Moderated or facilitated means someone's there and present with the person who's providing the data, and unmoderated means that someone isn't there. And there's loads of tools and software platforms that allow you to do both, and there's ways of facilitating that through the different tech that we have to allow you to do both. So you don't need to rely on a single tool or platform or process. However, there are single tools, platforms and processes that allow you to do many of those things. So I'd love to know if you do have any feedback, and I'm trying to look at the feedback we've got in the comments window. Thank you. If you could tell us about your favourite tools. I'm going to talk about some tools, and before I talk about the tools, I'm just going to talk about how you get to those tools and how you make decisions about why you use those tools. And as I said before, you'd be thinking about your questions, what you're trying to understand, taking that into how you might understand it through qualitative or quantitative research or both, maybe doing mixed methods research, that is a thing, and then, or testing, or you might just be running pure experiments, or you might just be testing out of a system. You might be doing non-digital testing of paper-based prototypes online through remote research or testing. So you do not need to only test digital things online, just to tell you that. You can test at a low fidelity, and you can also research at a low fidelity with certain tools and approaches. But with whatever you do with other people, you need to have an agenda. You need to know who's attending and who are the roles of those people. What are the roles of those people attending? What are their functions in that interaction with you? What are the tasks? What are the things that are going to happen, during that time with you? And what are the props that are needed to do it? So I guess that could be applied to co-located research as well. It doesn't have to be just remote research. But the reason I'm saying it's really important to be organised is that with remote and distributed research, you need to have everything, like all your ducks in a row. Just makes it easier, and you need to test those ducks. You need to make sure everything's working well. Maybe pilot what you're going to do before you do it. Before we did this session, we actually got online together and we talked about it. So that will really help you prepare for what you need to deliver in terms of research, testing or data collection and having those conversations. So I've got a whole lot of information here that is written down in lists, and it is a bit of death by PowerPoint, this slide. However, the information is from a decade of dealing with remote research and distributed testing. And also collaboration online. Do have a look at it. I think it might be helpful. I think you'll find loads of articles that will also help you. There's been heaps of stuff published, especially in the last couple of weeks, on how to remotely collaborate. So I'd really love for you to think about your planning, how you reach participants, how you pilot and test ahead before you start doing things, and how you quantify that you're successful through actually testing your process. Also, think about what you're going to do at the beginning of the session, have an agenda, be very faithful to that agenda, give yourself time if there's fluctuations or flexibility needed in sessions. Throughout the session, communicate, and also post-session follow-up. So there's a whole lot of things that you should be doing in terms of hygiene. And those of us who've worked in user research for a long time, or working in testing or research activities, will know that there is a lot of effort and planning involved in getting things right. However, it's worth it, because then you will actually be able to do things more quickly over time. So in terms of tools and services, there's quite a few to look at. Airtable have a fantastic online resource that I've added a link to here. And there's also a number of tools that I've used before that I've really enjoyed using, and I really recommend that you investigate. So check out Optimal Workshop, User Testing, User Zoom, Marvel, Askable, Lookback, Envision. All of those tools are really worth having a look at. And Indemo is apparently very good for diary studies. I haven't used Indemo before, but there you go, there's a recommendation. So in terms of video conferencing and cloud storage tools, you do really need to think about your storage right now, and you need to make sure it's compliant with your organisation. If you work for an organisation, think about data security, think about de-identification of data. If you're speaking with people, you do need to de-identify the information, and you do need to have it in secure storage. There's also thinking back to the ethics involved in engaging with people. It's really important that you don't record without asking people for permission. And when you do store their data, that you put it somewhere that's not publicly available. Also, there's lots of free and paid services that you can interact with. So you'll see that actually in these lists, and they're only a sample of some, you can actually access quite a lot of these services without having to pay anything until you reach a certain usage level. Also, it's really important, obviously, if you are working for an organisation, that you check that this is compliant with the security in your business. However, there's lots of opportunity there to look at these services and advocate for use of them, especially now given we're all distributed. And if you can't use those, ask your organisation what are the alternatives, what can you use instead, and what do you have licenses for right now. So in terms of getting to people, if you have an online presence, there's lots of opportunity, especially if you're tracking data, especially if you have a CRM, for example, a customer relationship management system, or a support database. There's a whole lot of opportunity to capture customer information or even intercept customers online and users. So don't think that you're without any opportunity to generate new panels of people to talk to external to the organisation, to actually capture prospects who are looking at your sites for the first time. There's lots of services that might help you, such as intercom. There's also user voice. If you're running experiments, you might be running them in the browser, for example. So you could use software like Optimizely. Also, recruiting through communities is super useful, especially if you're reaching out remotely. So if you recruit into, say, for example, relevant Slack communities, relevant Teams groups, relevant Facebook channels, relevant Insta, Reddit or Twitter communities, there's ways of reaching people even if you don't have direct reach right now or physical reach. So do think about that. Here's a really great example of different kinds of testing tools for remote testing. That's hosted on nngroup.com. So if you need to do some remote testing, have a look at that. It could help you. Also, if you already have pre-existing licenses, look at what you can do with your current licenses and how you can actually use them and hack them so you can do as much as you can with them. If you're looking at desk research and you really want to understand more about, say, for example, global communities, or understanding more about the nature of the community that you're actually working in, this is a really great tool. It's Hofstede's Insights. Hofstede has actually created a really awesome, Get Hofstede created a cultural dimensions theory, which actually informed this website, and it is a free resource and you can use it and you can compare cultures. So if you want to compare your culture to someone else's, it's very much possible to do that, and there might be other tools you can use as well. So here's a list of different tools and links that might be useful for you in this journey to remote research and data collection and testing to deliver great products and services. And absolutely happy to share with you any case studies should you need any assistance. But obviously we can take questions shortly. And most of all, I'd like to say, when you are talking with a lot of people, do take care of yourself. Self-care is really important, especially when we're accessing each other so much at the moment through Zoom and different services and channels. Do take time out for yourself, because we're at home right now. You need to create a distinction between work and home. And also as researchers who are listening and attempting to be compassionate to other people's needs and understand them and empathise with them potentially, you know, we need to have some time for ourselves to balance out a bit. So I do recommend you read this article by Vivian Castillo, and she's also got a really great talk that she did in Europe just recently about self-care in user research. So I think we're ready for questions now, Ed and Lisa.
Okay, so there's a bunch of comments going on in chat. I haven't quite kept up with to see if there's a lot of different questions in there, but there are two ways.
Yes, thanks, Sean. That's great.
Stick questions in the chat, or the Q&A is slightly more manageable from a panelist and from Cath's point of view to see that. So I would encourage you now to put some in there. The other thing we could do if you want to is to raise your hand using the raise your hand tool, which I can't figure out how it is. I think you put your mouse over your name in the participants list or something like that. There's some type of mechanism, and if you want to do that, we could unmute you and you could actually talk in a kind of radio program style. Oh, here's some questions coming in. Can you see them there? Okay,
yeah,
great.
I can, Ed, thanks. So we might take Vivek's, that's the first one. So some hacks to recruit people for data collection or user interviews. Well, there's lots of services, available for you to do that. So it really depends on the access you have to people who you're actually seeking to learn from in your user research or in your data collection, Vivek. If these are people who are already engaged with your products or services, you may have, marketing lists, or you may have information through customer service that you can access to tap into those people. Also, if you absolutely have no awareness of who those people might be, you may need to use a third-party recruiter. So there's lots and lots of people out there who do that. And I think I had a couple of examples here on, let's see if I've got those examples up. With people recruitment, like there are services like Farron and Stable Research who are actually services who you can ring and give data to around the profiling of the people that you need to reach. But there's also, it's just gone out of my head, a really great Sydney outfit who do this through an online service. And let me think of who they are. I thought I had them in my deck, but it'll come to me soon. So if you Google for user research recruitment in Sydney, there is an organisation that does that online, and they do that at a subscription rate. Also, Claire, you've asked about tips for establishing rapport over video chat and user interviews. Well, it would really be the same as when you meet somebody in person. So do have that getting to know you moment at the beginning, asking people how they are, asking them how their day was, within limits of, personal information being shared that's relevant to what you're actually researching or collecting data on. It's okay to be friendly and to have a laugh, but clearly it's also about making them feel comfortable so they know why they're there and what they're there for. So I'd say that's the best way to go with people that you've never met before. And I hope that helps you.
A few people have commented, is that service, the Sydney service you're talking about, Askable?
Yes, Askable.
There you go.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Cath, remote brain. Yeah.
Yeah, my brain's hopped out over there. Thank you.
Vivek has another question in Q&A.
Vivek, analysing all the content after user testing is often very time consuming. Any tips to make this faster? Okay, so it does take time, Vivek, and I'd just say do it iteratively. I wouldn't leave it all to the end. I'd make sure that you have time buffers between sessions so you can actually do that moment by moment. Maybe have a template set up so you can actually aggregate all of the information together, or use the collaboration tool so the people who are there during the testing can add their notes in the relevant spots. That would really help. I've used Trello before with one team to document all of our testing, well actually three teams to document testing with. So if you set up a Trello wall, that might help you. And you could use other tools as well. You don't need to use Trello if you don't have access to it in your organisation. You could use Planner, Microsoft Planner, which is an alternative Kanban solution. You could also use, Jira. You could set Jira up to be Kanban, designed. Sean, how do you balance, I hope that answers your question, Vivek. How do you balance the qualitative and quantitative significance of surveys? Well, that's really interesting. And how valuable do you think tools like Mechanical Turk are in this scenario? Well, I've never used Mechanical Turk. I'd love to hear a talk about that. I actually feel that surveys are very restrictive with qualitative data. You need to be limited with what you're looking for. You can't probe in a survey. So if you ask for qualitative information, you're not going to go very deep with it. So in your surveys, make sure you ask for qualitative detail where it's important, where it validates or supports the quantitative information that you're measuring. And it could be, Likert scaled information with a qualitative field after it. Think about the way you're actually balancing your survey and the intention. If you have too many qualitative questions, I'd actually say you need to run interviews or panels or workshops rather than running surveys. Thanks, Sean.